You hear it before you see it. A trembling voice lost inside the hiss of static. Base control. This is Falcon 3. Stormfront approaching. Visibility near zero. The words fracture, dissolve, then vanish entirely, swallowed by a sea of interference. The static thickens, rising and falling like a tide. Then, silence. You open your eyes to the blinding white of lightning slicing through tropical clouds. The world is vibrating, metal, wind, and the deep mechanical growl of engines locked in battle with the sky. The year is 1944. You are above the South Pacific, a place so vast and untamed that even the maps call parts of it unknown. Beneath you, the ocean writhes like a living thing, black and silver under the storm. Three planes fly in tight formation, their wings trembling as rain lashes against their hulls. Inside the cockpit, sweat and fear mingle. The smell of oil and ozone fills your lungs. One pilot's hands tighten on the stick. Another taps the compass that spins wildly, no longer obeying the Earth's pull. Somewhere behind you, a voice shouts over the radio, distant, desperate, and then it cuts out mid-syllable, leaving only the thunder's reply. The clouds close in like a shroud. The horizon disappears. The world becomes sound, roaring wind, cracking lightning, the tortured scream of engines pushed beyond mercy. For a heartbeat, you think you see something in the flashes of light. A dark silhouette moving above, faster than the storm itself, gone before your eyes can follow. And then the sky collapses. There is no explosion, no trail of smoke, just absence. The planes are gone. When the storm passes, the sea is calm again, as if nothing ever happened. Only the jungle on the islands below seems restless, its canopy shifting with whispers carried on the wind. Days later, search crews comb the skies and the coastlines, but they find nothing. Not metal, not wreckage, not a single name tag. It is as if the Pacific has swallowed them whole, erasing every trace but the memory of a signal that died mid-sentence. For decades, their families wait. The official reports say missing in action. The graves stay empty. But in the villages scattered along the jungle's edge, the old ones tell another story. Of metal birds that fell from the clouds, of fire that touched the earth but did not burn, of voices that still echo through the trees when the storms return. 75 years later, those whispers stir again. An expedition enters the same jungle that once swallowed men and metal, carrying drones and scanners instead of rifles. They think they're searching for history. But what they uncover will make even the most faithful believer question what waits beneath forgotten soil. Because what they find is not just wreckage, not just proof of a crash. It's something left behind, something deliberate, a message sealed in silence for 75 years, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. If stories like this vanish without someone to tell them, history fades twice, once in time and once in silence. Don't be the silence. Subscribe so these forgotten voices stay alive. The year was 1944, and the South Pacific was no longer a paradise. It was a chessboard of death and desperation. Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, the Coral Sea. These were not just coordinates. They were the final line between victory and annihilation. The air above them was thick with humidity and smoke, with the ghosts of men who flew too far into the storm. The Allied forces had turned the islands into waypoints of survival. Each strip of jungle was carved into an airfield, each lagoon turned into a graveyard for steel. From these fractured outposts, young men rose into the clouds aboard the machines that would define the war's twilight. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, its twin booms slicing the air like a predator's claws, and the B-25 Mitchell, a bomber built to chase shadows across enemy lines. They called one such patrol the Eclipse Squadron, a name that would come to mean more than anyone expected. Their mission was simple on paper. Fly low along the northern coast, escort a supply formation toward Bougainville, and return before the weather turned. But the Pacific has never honored paper plans. Its storms appear without warning, born from heat and silence, rising in columns of cloud that devour whole skies. Weather reports from that week tell of winds reaching 200 kilometers an hour, of barometric pressure falling faster than any recorded in the theater before. Even seasoned navigators wrote the same words in their logs: magnetic interference, instruments unreliable. The Eclipse Squadron lifted off at dawn. Witnesses on the ground remembered the sound. a low, rolling thunder that faded into the horizon. The official flight path traced their route along the coast, through a region locals still call the Valley of Mist, where mountains rise like black teeth out of the sea. The pilots checked in twice, their last transmission noting a rapidly forming front. Minutes later, all contact ceased. For days, search planes combed the skies. They found nothing but fragments of cloud and silence. The last entry in the mission log simply read, "Visibility lost, bearing unknown." Then even the handwriting trailed off, as if the pen itself had drowned. The weather records show that at the exact hour of their disappearance, a tropical cyclone formed over that very corridor, one of the fiercest of the year. It rolled through the region like a curtain closing on an act no one had rehearsed, leaving wreckage scattered across unnamed islands and unnamed graves. Yet none of it belonged to the Eclipse Squadron. They had vanished before the storm reached its peak, leaving behind only a flicker on the radar and the faint echo of static captured on a base recording. Then, silence. A silence so complete it felt deliberate, as though the sky itself had decided to keep a secret. Most people scroll past stories like this, then wonder why no one makes real history anymore. Prove them wrong. Hit subscribe before this tale fades like their signal. Number 2. The year is 2019. 75 years have passed since the Eclipse Squadron vanished into cloud and myth. The world has changed, yet the jungle has not. It still breathes with the same heavy rhythm, moist air, the hum of unseen insects, the restless murmur of trees that seem to whisper among themselves. Time, here, is a living thing. It grows vines over memory, moss over metal, silence over truth. A small team of local explorers moves through the undergrowth, each step sinking into soil that has swallowed generations. They are armed not with rifles, but with LiDAR scanners, drones, and a single unshakable rumor that deep inside the restricted valley, something sleeps beneath the roots. Their drones sweep the canopy, beams of infrared light piercing the green abyss. On their monitors, the jungle dissolves into ghostly layers, roots, stone, and then something else. Angular, metallic, out of place. They halt. The readings pulse like a heartbeat, steady and insistent. Beneath 70 years of mud lies a shape too symmetrical to be natural. The first shovels sink into the earth. Metal answers with a dull, reluctant note, the sound of memory being disturbed. They clear vines, lift panels, and the markings emerge in patches, the faded outline of a star, and below it, letters barely legible but unmistakable, U.S. Army Air Forces. The air grows still. It feels as though the forest itself is listening. They dig deeper. The wreckage lies in fragments, yet astonishingly preserved. A section of fuselage rests almost intact, encased in roots as thick as wrists. A leather satchel clings to what remains of a seat. When it's pried open, mud pours out. But within it, impossibly, a camera reel, the film still coiled and sealed by corrosion. Back at the lab, when cleaned and scanned frame by frame, ghostly faces appear. 3 men smiling at a base camp, unaware their laughter would become the last trace of their existence. Another find. A rusted compass, needle still trembling toward north, defying the years that should have killed its magnet. Nearby, they uncover a cluster of dog tags, the metal warped and half-fused to a melted panel. The names are faint, but one stands clear enough to read. The team sends photographs to the U.S. Defense POWMIA accounting agency. Weeks later, a reply arrives. The serial numbers match the Eclipse Squadron. The confirmation spreads across departments, then across continents. DNA tests follow, comparing samples from living relatives to tissue traces preserved in the cockpit debris. One by one, the identities align. The lost airmen are no longer myths. They are names, faces, sons. Science has reached through 75 years of silence and pulled their memory into the light. News breaks quietly at first, then grows louder. Historians, military archivists, even local elders drawn to the site. The discovery is treated not as archaeology but resurrection. What the world had chosen to forget, the jungle had chosen to keep. The roots had held their secret, waiting for hands patient enough to uncover it. If this discovery feels like destiny, Maybe it's because history waits for people who care enough to look. Are you one of them? Prove it. Subscribe to Cave Tales Ancient History. The discovery should have been the end of the mystery. But as the wreckage was cataloged and analyzed, the questions only multiplied. The jungle had given back the bodies, the aircraft, even the letters, but not the truth. What happened in those final minutes above the Pacific still ripples like a dark current beneath history's surface. The first theory rose from the logs of meteorological archives, a magnetic storm unlike anything recorded that season. Solar activity had peaked in early June 1944, sending waves of interference through the atmosphere. Radio operators across the theater had reported compass malfunctions, equipment failures, even static strong enough to erase recordings. The Eclipse Squadron's last words, instruments spinning, were more than panic. They were a symptom. The very sky had turned against them. Caught between the cyclone and the magnetic distortion, the planes could have spiraled off course, swallowed by cloud and gravity in a single unseen instant. The sea is wide enough to bury such mistakes forever. But another voice, colder and more precise, emerged from the archives. It came from declassified mission reports, long buried under routine files. The pages were marked Restricted, Friendly Fire Review. Cross-referencing coordinates, historians noticed something impossible. Another Allied squadron had flown in the same corridor that morning, on a bombing run scheduled only minutes apart. Their radio frequencies overlapped. Visibility was near zero. Witness statements mentioned unidentified silhouettes in formation, moments before weapons release. The reports were quietly sealed after the war. The implication was clear. The Eclipse Squadron may have died not at enemy hands but their own. A tragic error erased to protect morale. Still, there were others who refused such mechanical explanations. In the villages along the northern coast, the old storytellers kept a different memory, one unbroken by time. They spoke of the night the flaming eagles fell from the clouds, of thunder that shook the ground but brought no rain. The elders claimed that when they reached the crash site days later, the air smelled of iron and burnt air, but the trees around it were untouched, as if the fire had passed through without burning. For decades, those tales were dismissed as folklore. Now, with the wreckage unearthed, their words no longer sound like superstition. They sound like eyewitness testimony passed through generations. Then came the detail that silenced every room where the evidence was examined. In 2020, forensic engineers tested the engine fragments retrieved from the jungle. The residue embedded in the alloy did not match Japanese anti-aircraft munitions. It didn't even match the American ordnance of that era. It was something else, an explosive compound recorded nowhere in military inventories of the time. Unfamiliar. Out of place. The tests were repeated, confirmed, then classified. The Pentagon assigned the renewed investigation an archival tag, Project Blue Grave, part of a series devoted to unresolved wartime disappearances. Analysts reopened transmission files, compared radar patterns, and scoured the storm data. But the deeper they looked, the more contradictions emerged. Records that should have existed were missing. Others contained coordinates that changed between copies. One researcher wrote in his field notes, "It feels as though someone tried to bury more than wreckage." So what really happened? Did the magnetic storm twist their compasses into madness? Did friendly fire erase them from the sky, only for the truth to be hidden beneath bureaucracy? Or did something older, stranger, reach up from the clouds and take them, leaving behind the smell of ozone and a silence that has lasted 75 years? Most people will stop here, satisfied with mystery. But real historians keep digging. If you're still watching, you're one of us. Prove it by subscribing right now. In 2020, after years of silence and paperwork that passed like ghost hands through forgotten archives, the remains of the Eclipse Squadron finally came home. The airfields that had once launched them into oblivion were gone, swallowed by vines and salt. But a new runway opened for them, one last time. Their coffins, draped in flags that caught the morning light, arrived at a joint ceremony attended by American and Papuan veterans, men whose faces carried the years those pilots never lived to see. The air was heavy that day, not with rain, but with the weight of memory. You could hear it in the tremble of the bugle, in the rustle of uniforms, in the quiet breath of families standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers who had waited a lifetime to say goodbye. The jungle's survivors came too, the elders who still remembered the night the sky had burned. They stood in silence, watching as the soldiers of two nations bowed their heads for three men who had once vanished between them. When the caskets were opened for identification, a few artifacts were placed beside them, mute witnesses from another century. Among them was a small, corroded tin box recovered from beneath the pilot's seat. Inside were scraps of paper sealed in wax, the ink faded but legible under forensic light. Letters written by hands that had known they might never return. One of them began simply, in careful script, "If I don't return, let my story be told somewhere beneath an open sky." That wish, carried across 75 years of silence, was finally answered. The families read those words through tears. The daughter of one pilot, now gray-haired and trembling, pressed her palm against the flag that covered her father's name. Nearby, a local veteran recited a verse in his own language, a prayer for travelers who never found their way back. The wind picked up, rustling through the rows of flags until they whispered like wings. As the ceremony closed, the last surviving member of their squadron, an old man wheeled forward by his grandson, saluted the three coffins. His voice cracked as he spoke. "We thought the war forgot you. But the world never does. It just waits for someone to remember." The jets overhead roared once, then were gone, leaving only silence. Not the silence of loss, but the kind that follows understanding, the kind that sounds like peace. They faded in 1944, but their story returned because someone cared enough to listen. The jungle remembered them, the earth preserved them, and history, patient and unforgiving, made sure their names were spoken again. You just spent minutes keeping their memory alive. Don't let it die the moment this video ends. Subscribe to Cave Tales Ancient History, or admit in the comments that their story meant nothing to you. The jungle breathes again. Its canopy stretches endlessly, a sea of green that hides the bones of a forgotten war. Shafts of sunlight pierce through the mist, glinting off rusted fragments, the curve of a propeller, the corner of a wing, a compass frozen forever toward north. The air hums with life now, the same air that once carried fire and metal. The forest has reclaimed its peace, but beneath every root and stone lies memory. You can still see them if you look long enough. The faces caught on that faded film reel, smiling at a world that no longer exists. Their laughter, silent but eternal, flickers across time like candlelight in a cavern. Somewhere above, the faint echo of engines drifts between clouds, or maybe it's just the wind repeating what it once heard 75 years ago. Families still visit the site. They come not as mourners but as witnesses. They kneel before the wreckage, tracing their fingers over serial numbers etched by hands that never made it home. Some bring photographs, some bring flags, and some simply stand and listen to the jungle, to the silence, to whatever remains between them and the sky. Historians call the Eclipse Squadron a footnote in the Pacific Campaign. But footnotes are where truth hides, where the forgotten continue to whisper through the cracks of time. What began as tragedy has become something else, an inheritance. Proof that even in an age drowning in noise, the quiet voices of the past still find their way back. History doesn't haunt us. It waits for us. It waits for someone to care, to uncover, to listen. And when we finally do, it rewards us not with closure, but with connection. The storm may have taken their lives, but time returned their meaning. The screen fades slowly to black. The sound of the jungle gives way to static, the same crackling radio noise that opened this story. For a moment, it feels as though the transmission is returning from 1944, voices breaking through the interference, calling out from somewhere beyond the storm. Then the static begins to shift, becoming clearer, sharper, modern. The signal has survived, and with it, their story. Subscribe to Cave Tales Ancient History and keep the signal alive.